Welcome to They Are Waiting for Us from Forbes Books, the podcast that explores how education can transform lives and communities, featuring conversations with change agents who are making a difference in education, from parents and advocates to teachers and leaders. Here's Dr. Lisa Andrew.
My guest today is Sofía De Jesús, author of Applied Computational Thinking with Python, and an educator with over 2 decades of experience in teaching and educational publishing. With expertise in STEM programs and a passion for ethical AI in K-12 education, Sofía is at the forefront of shaping inclusive and innovative learning environments. Sofía, welcome to They Are Waiting for Us.
Thank you for having me.
So you are on quite a journey of preparing and influencing our future workforce. So you have, over 24 years of experience in the classroom and in educational publishing. You've been a teacher. You've built STEM and computational thinking programs and developed curriculum and assessments for multiple national and international organizations. You definitely haven't been sitting around. Thank you for all that contribution. So why don't you describe one of the brightest moments in your career thus far?
So the last 3 years would count. I was lucky enough to join Carnegie Mellon University in their program for computer science. The CMUC is Academy, which is an outreach project that provides free curriculum and professional development for teachers who are taking computer science into classrooms. So that's a huge high note for my career and for work that aligns with my personal mission, which is equitable and accessible education. And I would also say last year I was a Computer Science Teachers Association Equity Fellow. So I got to spend the whole year just exploring, understanding, learning, studying about AI, how to advocate for ethical AI, which some will argue might not be possible, but specifically with Gen AI, because I do want to make that distinction. But that, I got to work with Dr. Kip Glazier, who is an administrator in California. And we worked on a framework for trying to help leaders figure out what to use, when to use it, and how to go about that.
Great. Well, we're definitely going to dive into all of those bright spots as we move through the podcast. So happy to hear that. And so now kind of the other side, what's been the biggest lesson that you've learned to date?
I struggle with that answer because it's two sides of a coin, Technology is a phenomenal tool, sometimes depending on the technology, for providing access, allowing students to interact with more knowledge, with more information out there, with the world at large. It can also be extremely detrimental. It can enhance achievement gaps. It can make underrepresented students not have access to more things. So it's just one of those things where it's and it's what my advocacy work centers on is, what do you need first? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? Because we want to force so much technology in the classroom without a lot of background technology, instruction, understanding of what we're using, why we're using it, what's the benefit, what's the analysis of its impact, that we make too many mistakes. And I think that we've made more mistakes than we've solved recently in the past. Recent, as you get older, becomes more like a decade than the last year. But I think that's, I've learned that technology is cool as heck. I'm a geek and I love technology, but we gotta understand it before we push it.
Right. And as a fellow teacher, I remember sometimes we're really excited about implementation. We see its promise. We implement too soon before really understanding, and it doesn't quite go as we think, and then we abandon it. And it's really not the tool, but it was the way that we went about implementing it with a half understanding.
That, and then one of the things that I also think about too is we talk a lot about like this worked really well for some students, this works really well for other students, etc. But we don't talk enough about what works for a teacher. And, that technology might be phenomenal in my classroom, the way that I use it, but then somebody else tries to use it the same way, it doesn't work because we're not the same people and our students are not the same students. So there's more to it than here's a tool and it works. And I argue about this when I talk about research too, where, they'll say like, oh, we found that this curriculum is amazing and it helps solve this and it works. And I'm like, but what's your sample? Who are your teachers? What's their background? What's their education? How many years have they been in the classroom? And how did that affect the outcomes of that study you did?
Right.
Because it's more than just, this is an excellent curriculum. This is an excellent curriculum that is being used by excellent teachers. We have to marry those things. We can't just say the technology is great, the curriculum is great, or the teacher is great. We need a mix of those things in order to work.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I remember as a teacher, but then also as an administrator, being responsible for building teacher capacity. Really, there is a science to teaching, which is the stuff, but there's the art to teaching, which is so individual. And while we say, the science of it is to use this tool, use this curriculum, use this strategy, if the art side of implementing that, or you could say the curriculum and the pedagogy or whatever it is, if it's not there, it's a struggle. And then again, you're right. We point to, well, was it the tool? Was it the teacher? Was it the student? When it just wasn't a good match. And we don't need to lay any kind of blame anywhere, but then what's the next thing that might work? And that's true capacity building of both the teacher and the student, with the match with the curriculum. So sounds like you and I would have a good night out drinking coffee. All right. So as mentioned prior, you have experience in building STEM programs. And in my organization, the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, we believe that the students of Silicon Valley should become the workforce of Silicon Valley, but find that a lot of our Silicon Valley students do not have access to comprehensive STEM programming. And they don't have the opportunity to even begin that journey. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in implementing STEM programs in schools? One, biggest challenge. And then how can they be overcome? Because I bet you've got some ideas.
Funding.
Yes.
Funding is a big one. And then capacity is a second big one as well. So again, there's multiple levels of all of the things in order to work, right? So and the thing is, ongoing funding is also a caveat to that. A lot of the times we get a one-time funding to create a makerspace or to bring technology, one-to-one devices, all sorts of things into classrooms. The problem is what happens next, right? So some schools right now, for example, are dealing with devices that are 10 years old because there is no plan for replacement. There is no money to replace them. So students break their Chromebook or their laptop and then they don't have anything else. The same can be said for STEM programs because we're talking about robots. Robots break. Parts go missing. Some of it is consumable, which means that the funding has to be ongoing because otherwise that program will die. Not only that, but if we don't have capacity, so a lot of the times a STEM program is run by one person, and that person is supporting an entire school or entire district. And then what happens is that person leaves, or we lose funding or whatever, and then the things are there, but there's nobody to use them, nobody who's prepared for it. There's various levels, funding being a massive one, because we all talk a lot about our school taxes are expensive, but it's hard to fathom how are we going to support all the technology that they want us to use in schools and these STEM programs that are necessary, because the thing is, exploration has gone away from a lot of schools that was done in other classes, and STEM bridges that. And And we can go into the critical thinking parts and how we used to do a lot of that in science and mathematics. And when calculators came in, we removed it from mathematics. And science, we don't have time for all of the labs that we used to do. And so STEM is a way for us to bring some of that critical thinking, processing, design thinking into schools. But we have to be able to prepare the teachers, include all teachers, because that's the other part. It seems like a lot of STEM programs separate what happens in STEM from other aspects of school, where it should all be married. And so it's those, we want to prepare teachers that understand how to incorporate those tools that they have in school to their own classrooms, because it should bleed into all of the interdisciplinary areas. I do think that there's a need for more interdisciplinary focus because our world is different. And while I do think that in elementary school, it is really critical to work on foundational knowledge, I do think that at middle school minimum, we have to start doing a whole lot more that's just outside of the realm of our typical traditional education.
Yes. So kind of in that vein, because you've talked about the funding and capacity, and then I'm wondering now about the role of the school leader. So in your experience, have you seen or have examples of school leaders who have really been able to create an innovative learning environment that fosters STEM programs?
That's such a hard question to answer, honestly, but I will. The answer is yes and no. A lot of leaders in schools are not experts in child development. And that's a thing that I think affects the decisions that are made. Child development seems to be a secondary conversation to all of the things in the technology and whatever. So although we know that we shouldn't have students looking at screens for 8 hours a day, my class is important, so I'm going to use it, and so will the other 7 teachers in that day. And we end up going against all of those things. And if we don't have leaders that are actually knowledgeable about this, it's hard to implement plans that safeguard the knowledge base of the students, how they're acquiring that knowledge, what they're experiencing in school, etc. So that's one piece. I also think that leaders have to work with less salespeople and more educators, because a lot of the times they're making decisions based on what a company is offering. So there's a sales pitch, people go in, here's all we can do, here's what we can offer, this is your price, this is your cost, this is your whatever. A lot of the times they sell you that and then they leave. There's no follow-up, they train your teachers for 3 hours one day and good luck to you all. And I think that that's a decision that's a bad decision. I think that we need to be more critical, more thoughtful about who we use, when we use them, what the problem is that we're trying to solve. Because again, EdTech attacks this as a solution for all of your woes. But they never tell me what the problem that they're trying to solve is. So first tell me the problem, and then let's try to find a solution that might save us some trouble, might help our schools, might support my teachers instead of adding on. Because that's the other piece. We get all of these technologies, all of these initiatives, all of this whatever, and now the teacher has to become an expert on yet another thing. And they're already at capacity or more. I don't know any teacher who's not working overtime or doesn't have to take classes in professional development to assist them in the things that they're being asked to do.
So let's narrow the focus a little bit of STEM, because STEM is big, and talk about, it's, I bet, something near and dear to your heart since it's part of the title of your new book. So let's talk about computational thinking, all right? And so can you explain the concept of computational thinking and why it's important for today's students?
So I see computational thinking, and a lot of people define it slightly different, but I see it as a problem-solving, critical processing thing. So, and I will talk about the program that I last created, which is a computational thinking program. in that program, I built a set of electives for middle school where students had to take, and we switched everything because the administration was extremely helpful to me in that they listened and they implemented, and we did a lot. But we switched from you have to take these courses and then some electives to you have to have these many units per strand. So 10 units in the humanities, and every unit was a trimester, and 4 units in computational thinking. And so my computational thinking wasn't just computer science, for example. So they could take coding, but they could take circuits, they could take machines, they could take robotics. And it was a way for students to dabble in let me look at all of these areas and multiple different areas, or you could also take programming 3 years in a row if you wanted to. But because it was 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. But the point was giving students the opportunity to see all of the different areas and then using computational thinking in those classes. Because computational thinking as a whole is like, how do I tackle that problem, that project that we're doing? And then how do I solve a problem? So like in design thinking and machines classes, we were solving specific problems, either how to create a garden that was sustainable for the school, or how to build a piece of furniture that was needed for the elementary school, or something like that. So it was just trying to figure out how to use computational thinking in those classes, but there were multiple different classes. And again, students didn't have to take 1, they had to take 4. So, and that can vary depending on what your schedule looks like, but we had 45-minute classes, and there was like 7 or 8 classes a day. I don't remember.
Yeah. Like you, we here at SVF are often explaining that computational thinking is more than coding. Computer science is more than coding, and just really trying to get the word out about that. So really appreciate that approach. And so then kind of like back to your recently published book, how did your 24 years of experience in education shape your approach to writing applied computational thinking with Python?
So I think that's a mix of like my own experiences, my own frustrations, and also the way that I write. So like I write informally. I write how I would like a book to be written to me, which is, yes, there's technical stuff, but what's your process? That's what I want to know. Like, what's your process to solving this? And that's how I approached it. And I have a co-author, Dayreen Martinez, and she wrote some of the later problems. I was running out of time, and I also needed somebody who could help me process through some of the code. But yes, but that's the collaborative piece also of, I wanted people to hear how we think. How do you tackle that particular problem? And is this the best solution? No, not necessarily. You might have a better solution for this. Here are some things that I was thinking about as I created that. Because I also think that the reflection piece is critical to computational thinking. How did I tackle this? And if I were to start over, would I tackle it the same way again? The answer is almost 100% no, I wouldn't tackle it the same way. Because as you're solving the problem, you're learning stuff.
Right.
So of course, the things that I learned, I'm going to use if I have to do it again. And I used to tell my students all the time, I'm like, the solution that I figure out today, and you ask me again tomorrow, I'm going to forget how I approached it. That's the truth. We can't, I don't remember, because it's complex. Like some of the problems are complex. And that means that my brain's going to process different pieces of it differently every time I'm approached the problem. So it isn't necessarily about like, here's step 1, 2, 3. Rather, what am I trying to solve? What things do I already know? What am I trying to find out from this? What's my output? Like, what is it that I'm looking for as an output? And then trying to put together the algorithm. And then when I do it, I'm like, ugh, I don't like this one. I don't like that solution. I think it would be better if I did. And then showing that also in the book. Because we don't show that. We show too much, everything's polished and perfect, where that's never. I keep telling, every student that I ever see is like, I don't know anybody who writes the perfect code the first time around. And if they did, I would be like, that was a fluke, because it doesn't happen. You need to research stuff, you need to check things, and you're gonna have at least a typo somewhere.
I think you're describing actually my personal life. Yes. Approach to problem solving, and I don't like that solution, and this didn't work, and and learning from. But yeah, I agree. In all forms of teaching, showing students, and even in adult learners, maybe even more importantly, adult learners, that the first answer or the first way of going at it is not necessarily going to be the one that you land on, that it's about multiple.
And that's one of the things that when we offer professional development in my team, it's never one person alone. So there's always multiple people. And sometimes when I'm running it, and I have a couple of like undergrad students, or my head TA or something is in there as well, and then a teacher will ask a question, and I'm like, I'm stuck. Like, I'm honestly stuck. I don't remember. And I've solved this 1,000 times, but I'm, and I'll be like, oh, help me out. Like, I'll ask somebody who's there with me to say like, hey, do you have any thoughts? And I will sometimes ask the teachers, like, what do you see? What do you think? Because right now I'm stuck. And I try to mirror that for teachers too, because in my day, back when I first started, we were supposed to be the experts. We were taught that we had to be right, and if you were wrong, the kids made fun of you, and it was just this thing where you had to be perfect. And as I thankfully have matured in a little bit, I've learned that it's more valuable for students to see the mistakes, to see that process, the iteration, right? Because in computational thinking, part of the whole process is iteration. It's, let me try that a different way. Let me see it again. Does it work every time? Does it work for multiple things? Like, there's just a lot of processing that needs to go, and a lot of conversation that needs to happen, because I also think that it is better collaborative.
Absolutely. And I think that's the perfect place for us to take a break. Coming up next time, Sofía De Jesús, the author of Applied Computational Thinking with Python, will share her thoughts on the ripple effect of AI on students.
It's like, it's just yet another thing that's going to make it easier to do certain things. But in the long run, we have a population that is no longer able to process. And we need a population, like, it's the same thing like, we don't need creatives as much, which was something that was said by Mira Murati when she was still at OpenAI. Creatives are everything. Every advancement in technology has a creative that started it.
This has been They Are Waiting for Us. If you want to learn how to create economic opportunity through equal access to quality education and create an extraordinary learning environment focused on everyone realizing their full potential, go to drlisaandrew.com. They Are Waiting for Us is a production of Forbes Books.